dad and mom were in an accident. Come back right away. You said this was a trip to honor your parents, right? Don't lie to me about not inviting me on purpose. That's just petty. My husband was supposed to be on a 3-day, 2-night trip with his parents, honoring them. He had told me that his parents didn't want me to come because I was an outsider. Furthermore, he told me that to avoid upsetting them, I shouldn't contact him during the trip. But then I got a call saying that my in-laws, who were supposed to be with my husband, had been in an accident near our house and were undergoing emergency surgery. My husband, however, still claimed he was enjoying the trip with them. What was going on? After some time, I was finally able to see my in-laws once the anesthesia wore off. I entered the hospital room with someone who had rushed over with me. My in-laws, not seeing my husband, assumed I hadn't contacted him yet and told me to do so immediately. But the person with me explained our conversation earlier. Understanding the situation, my in-laws decided not to contact my husband. When my clueless husband returned home from his fun trip, he found the house a mess and me gone. He furiously called me. From the moment I answered that call, my husband's life began to fall apart. I have a teacher I deeply respect. Meeting that teacher taught me many things. Wanting to be like that mentor, I decided to become a teacher when I was aiming for college. At one point, many people with teaching licenses couldn't become teachers due to a decline in the number of children, but recently the number of teachers has decreased. So, after graduating from college, I got assigned to a school, and my teaching career began smoothly. However, being a teacher is very demanding, leaving me with little personal time. Naturally, I had no time for relationships, and the years passed. I didn't have a strong desire to marry, so it didn't bother me much, but among my peers, there were those who wanted to work and marry, so they organized matchmaking parties. Sometimes, I was invited to these parties just to make up the numbers. It was at one of these parties that I met my husband, who was a tutor. He was a popular tutor at a well-known prep school. He was highly trusted by both the students and their parents, which earned him a respectable position and kept him busy every day. My husband's videos were also popular, earning him a significant side income. Sometimes he was invited to appear on TV quiz shows, and people occasionally recognized him on the street and asked for his autograph. Despite being busy, he was a very attentive person, always kind and fair to everyone. I was gradually drawn to his personality and began to think about marrying him. I thought a man like him would be the perfect husband, but I was too afraid of being rejected to propose. On my birthday one year, during a dinner out, he surprised me with a proposal, and I cried with happiness. I was thrilled to have the privilege of supporting such a wonderful person and started to prioritize everything around him. So, when he earnestly asked me to become a housewife after we got married, I was hesitant to leave my teaching job, but I couldn't imagine losing him, so I chose to become a housewife. For a while after our marriage, life was fulfilling and happy. He would come straight home from work and praise my home-cooked meals. I never had a strong desire to marry and wasn't particularly good at cooking, nor did I have a wide repertoire of dishes. I followed simple recipes and experimented, and he always praised my efforts and ate everything, even my failed attempts. On weekends, he would cook, or we would dine out on his payday. However, at some point, his attitude suddenly changed. He started saying my cooking tastes like garbage and would throw it away right in front of me. He would cut my living expenses, claiming my housework was subpar. No matter how much I cleaned the floors, he would deliberately dirty them and blame me. It seemed like he was using me to vent his frustrations rather than genuinely criticizing my housekeeping. I recalled him mentioning that his job as a tutor involved a lot of menial tasks, and I thought he was stressed from work, so I tried to let his irritation wash over me. But his frustration persisted for over half a month, and my mental health started to suffer. Wondering how I could get him back to his old self, I once sought advice from my in-laws, who had happened to contact me. They told me he was a very particular person and that they had also struggled with him at times. They said I just had to endure it and wait for time to resolve things. I felt like they were somehow blaming me and was disappointed. It seemed my in-laws were also on his side, which made me feel hopeless. My husband criticized my housework daily but didn't restrict or reprimand me for going out. He didn't complain about what I did while he was away. So, after finishing my chores, I decided to go out for a change of scenery. I took a different route than usual and spent time idly in a park I rarely visited. Then, at that park, I had a miraculous reunion with my former teacher. I first met him in my freshman year of high school. The last time we spoke was the year after I graduated high school, at the school's cultural festival. It had been about 8 years since then. We exchanged information about what we had been up to over these years, and he mentioned meeting other former students. We reminisced about familiar names and lost track of time, engrossed in conversation. I mentioned that I had gotten married and changed my last name, which is somewhat uncommon. To my surprise, my teacher mentioned a name I knew. It turned out my teacher and my father-in-law were old friends. My teacher had devoted his life to education and was still single. My father-in-law, on the other hand, got married shortly after graduating from college, and my husband was born the following year. I was amazed at how small the world could be. My teacher also shared some interesting stories about my father-in-law, and before we knew it, a lot of time had passed. We exchanged contact information and decided to keep in touch through letters. I got home quite late and didn't have time to go shopping, so I prepared dinner for my husband with leftovers. As soon as I started, my husband came home. He complained that dinner wasn't ready yet, but didn't ask what I had been doing until that time. It seemed he had no interest in what I did outside of housework. Every time he saw me, he had something to criticize. At first, it bothered me, but eventually, I realized it was just his routine, and I started to tune it out. A few days later, my husband came home unusually cheerful. He said he was going on a trip to show gratitude to his parents and started packing. He began to explain, without me asking, that the reason I wasn't invited was that it would be uncomfortable for me as the daughter-in-law. He added that his parents wanted it to be just family, so I was absolutely not to contact him during the trip, and then he left, walking briskly. I watched his back as he left. The thought of him being gone for a while made me feel much lighter. I realized how much not having to cater to his needs reduced my stress and enjoyed a relaxing time. As I started to doze off while watching TV, the phone suddenly rang. I jumped up reflexively and answered it. It was a call from the hospital. My in-laws had been in an accident and were taken to the hospital. They were undergoing emergency surgery. My in-laws always carried their medical records with them. While they didn't have any major health issues, my father-in-law had sensitive skin and allergies, for which he frequently visited a dermatologist. Most of the time, he was prescribed ointment, but occasionally he received oral medication. They had been advised to keep a record of their allergies and other medical information in their medical records, which also included our home contact information as an emergency contact. The hospital had called based on this information and urgently requested that I come to the hospital as soon as possible. However, the hospital only mentioned my in-laws and said nothing about my husband, who was supposed to be traveling with them. I was so upset that I started shouting, "How about my husband? Isn't my husband in the same hospital?" The person on the phone said, "Please calm down, I'll explain step by step," but it took me a while to understand. Once I calmed down and understood the hospital's explanation, I realized that only my in-laws were taken to the hospital. They said there was no sign of my husband at the accident scene. Moreover, the accident happened near my in-laws' house, not at their travel destination. I thought maybe they had an accident while going on a trip, but there were no travel bags. A witness also mentioned it looked like they were on their usual daily walk. A runaway car jumped the curb, and several others besides my in-laws were also injured. I noted down the name of the hospital and hung up the phone. Then I tried contacting my husband. However, no matter how many times I called, his phone wouldn't connect. I reluctantly explained the situation via email, asking him to call me back. I hailed a cab and rushed to the hospital where my in-laws were taken. When I arrived, my father-in-law's emergency surgery had just finished. It seemed they were able to respond quickly because his regular doctor was there and they had his medication and allergy records. My mother-in-law, usually healthy and robust, took longer because they had to be cautious of any unknown allergies. Nevertheless, my in-laws survived, and when the anesthesia wore off, they were fully conscious and had their memories intact. After making sure my in-laws were stable, I reviewed and completed the necessary paperwork for their hospitalization and surgery. It seems they will need several more surgeries. The rehabilitation will be quite tough, and considering their age, it will be a significant challenge. After finishing all the procedures, I checked my phone, but there was still no return call from my husband. I called him again, but it still didn't connect. My in-laws weren't on the supposed trip, and I'd never heard of such a plan. So where exactly is my husband? It's definitely a trip, and he lied about it being a family trip, so I can only imagine it's a trip he couldn't tell me about. It all points to my husband cheating. But without proof, if I accuse him, he'll definitely come up with excuses and slip away. As I wondered where my husband could be, I remembered he used to be on social media before we got married. I wasn't interested in those things and just thought he was a meticulous person. So, except for the times he proudly showed me his social media, I never looked at it. After we got married, he stopped talking about it, so I didn't pay attention. But I remembered how he used to boast on social media and thought maybe he's still the same. So I searched for it. That social media site requires real names. My husband should still be using his real name, so I found him quickly. It's a unique last name, so there were no duplicates, and the profile picture was his face, so no doubt about it. He had posted something today. And it included a picture. A picture of him with a woman I don't know and a caption. It said he was on a trip with his beloved. It also mentioned a recently popular tourist spot. My husband was following the woman's account. Naturally, the woman he was cheating with was also registered under her real name. From their posts, it was easy to understand how their relationship had deepened. They openly talked about their trip, making it easy to imagine what they were doing and where they were. Mostly. I had suspected something like this, but the fact that he was unresponsive even in the face of his parents' crisis out of a desire not to be disturbed filled me with nothing but anger and contempt. I was angry and sad about him betraying me. I could only be disgusted by such a low-level lie as using his parents to go on a trip. My emotions were mixed, but gradually, my sadness at the betrayal was replaced by anger at my husband for thinking he was fooling me. Just then, my mentor arrived. Knowing the relationship with my father-in-law, I had contacted my mentor. When he heard about my father-in-law's accident, he said he would come as soon as he finished his work. I told my mentor that the surgery had ended successfully and my father-in-law's life was saved. However, I also told him that there would be more surgeries and tough rehabilitation ahead, which made him show a complex expression. My mentor recalled how tough his own rehabilitation had been when he once fractured a bone. But he was relieved, saying it was fortunate they survived. "Would you like to see my father-in-law now?" "He should still be awake," I asked my mentor. My mentor appreciated the offer, but wondered if my husband was inside taking care of them. Seeing only me outside the room, my mentor thought my husband and his parents were having family time. When I told him no one was in the room, my mentor was shocked. How could their own son not rush to their side in such a situation? Nowadays, there are few companies that prioritize work over parents' emergencies. If such a company existed, it would be labeled as black, with no future. And my husband, whom I no longer found worth defending. I confided everything to my mentor without hiding anything. In the midst of this, my husband called. I interrupted my conversation with my mentor to answer his call. I explained that his parents were hospitalized, the surgery was successful, but they needed further surgery, and that his father needed special attention due to allergies. I quickly asked him to come to the hospital to hear everything in person. However, my husband ignored my plea and accused me of ruining his trip. He ranted that my calls ruined the fun, his parents were in a bad mood, and he was busy trying to appease them, then he abruptly hung up. I immediately called back, but he didn't answer. I had no choice but to contact him through a messaging app. I sent a short message, "Your parents are in the hospital, come home immediately." He read it right away but replied, "Don't joke. I'm with them, so your lie is obvious. It's bad taste to use my parents' lives as an excuse to ruin my trip. You're the worst. I'm blocking your calls during this trip." I tried to respond, but I couldn't send the message. Since this exchange happened in front of my mentor, we exchanged looks after my husband blocked me. It was clear to my mentor that my husband was lying to prioritize his own desires. My mentor was furious, not just at my husband's infidelity, but also at his neglect in a crisis. He had thought his friend's son was a better man. To be so irresponsible and unfaithful, my mentor suggested we should teach my husband a lesson and said he had a good idea. Afterward, we went into the hospital room together. Despite feeling sorry for my in-laws post-surgery, my mentor convinced me that we needed to share what was happening. My father-in-law agreed to listen to me. After hearing everything, my in-laws looked stunned. My mother-in-law, as a woman, said she couldn't forgive a man who betrayed his wife, even if he was her son. My father-in-law, as a man, felt ashamed and disappointed. They deeply apologized for not facing my troubles before. When I expressed my desire for a divorce, they promised to respect my decision to the fullest. 3 days later, my husband returned from his trip. However, I was out visiting my in-laws at the hospital. My in-laws had both been unexpectedly hospitalized after an accident. Since I was the only nearby relative, I had to take care of them. As a result, I had been neglecting the house. I couldn't bring myself to do anything for a husband I had already decided to divorce. Consequently, the house was in disarray after being left unattended for 3 days. Moreover, my husband was very upset because I didn't greet him upon his return. He complained about my leaving the house chores undone while he was away and even questioned my role as a housewife, making numerous remarks as if I were just a maid. Since I was in my in-laws' hospital room, I put my husband's call on speakerphone so they could hear his selfish comments. Unable to tolerate what they heard, my father-in-law scolded my husband from the hospital room. "How can you say that when you were enjoying a trip and left your wife behind?" My husband then started lying, claiming he had invited me, but I had refused. Originally, he had told me it was a family trip. If he had invited me and I refused, wouldn't that mean his parents refused too? I realized my husband was in a state of panic. He was confused as to why I was with his father and why his father was taking my side. Fed up with my husband's pathetic excuses, my father-in-law pointed out, "So you prioritize your trip even when your parents need emergency surgery?" There was a moment of silence. It seemed my father-in-law's words made my husband realize I had been telling the truth about the accident all along. Desperately trying to justify himself, my husband pathetically blamed me, saying my explanations were unclear or that my words were difficult to understand because of my accent. "So you prioritize pleasing your mistress over being reachable when your parents are in trouble?" "No, it's not like that." "An affair? What are you talking about? I just didn't want to waste a good trip and went with a friend." "Shut up. I know you don't have any friends. You never went out with friends in school either. Lying and blaming others, you're no longer part of this family." "Wait, Dad. It's not true. I do have friends. People can make friends after starting work, can't they?" My husband continued to make excuses, but my father-in-law interrupted him again. "A man who neglects his family is a disgrace. Justifying an affair under your real name will eventually cost you your social standing." Hearing that my father-in-law knew everything about his social media posts finally silenced my husband. My in-laws were actually quite technologically challenged and had never owned a cell phone until recently. We had persuaded them to get one cell phone for emergencies, but they had never learned to use it beyond making calls. My husband had assumed they wouldn't know about social media. Furthermore, my husband knew that I wasn't interested in social media and didn't use it, so he assumed there was no way we would find out. I have all the evidence, so stop struggling. I'm going to proceed with the divorce. I also added that I expected him to pay alimony. My in-laws declared him a disgrace to the family and disowned him. Later, I asked a lawyer, recommended by my mentor, to demand compensation from the woman my husband was cheating with. My husband contacted me several times, asking me to reconsider the divorce. He never apologized for the affair. He seemed to think that if he was slightly submissive, I would follow his lead. I was astounded by how delusional he was. I completely ignored his persistent requests to reconcile. The lawyer warned him that if the matter went to court, he could lose his job, which finally made him agree to the divorce. Even a scumbag like him was afraid of losing his job. He paid the alimony in a lump sum. Sometime later, my husband called me again. There were rumors about his affair at his workplace, and he was summoned by the higher-ups. He accused me of snitching on him. I just sighed internally, thinking, I wouldn't do something so childish. You had an affair with a woman at your workplace, so someone might have noticed. All he could respond with was a confused huh? In fact, my mentor had retired from teaching a few years after I graduated high school and had successfully opened a preparatory school. Now, he has a chain of schools in different states. A few years ago, he stepped back from active teaching and focused solely on managing the business. So it's no wonder my husband didn't know him. My husband worked at a school managed by my mentor. My father-in-law quickly realized that my husband's employer was his friend, but he kept this knowledge to himself to prevent my husband from relying on his connections. My mentor also understood my father-in-law's intention and chose not to disclose their relationship, instead evaluating my husband's abilities as a teacher. When my mentor learned about my husband's affair, he was concerned it might negatively affect the students. However, when he found out that the affair was with a woman from the same school, he considered transferring them to separate branches. However, when my mentor learned that the affair was with a woman from the same school, he considered transferring them to separate branches. But my husband not only had the affair, he also prioritized it over his parents' crisis. No matter how popular and competent he was as a tutor, my mentor decided that someone who behaved so disgracefully could not be trusted with the students. So, my husband was demoted to the same level as a new tutor. The rumors started when a parent of a student saw my husband and his mistress on their trip. Both my husband and his mistress used their real names on social media, so a quick search confirmed everything, and the information spread among the parents. Their children overheard these conversations, and soon the entire school knew about the affair. This is what happens when you post pictures of your affair trip online for everyone to see. It's your own fault. I also told him that further contact would be considered harassment, and if he persisted, I would take legal action for stalking. After that, my husband and his mistress were transferred to different schools, but the rumors spread so widely that even unfounded ones emerged. They faced harsh words from both parents and students, and eventually, they resigned. My husband began contacting me again, claiming he was struggling financially and asking me to return the alimony. He even suggested that if we lived together, alimony wouldn't be necessary, making another absurd attempt to reconcile. His actions were so repulsive that I told him if he contacted me again, I would block him. Realizing he had no one else to complain to, he stopped contacting me for a few months. However, I heard he turned to my in-laws for help. My father-in-law, who had recovered by then, kicked him out. He then sought help from other relatives, but no one would take him in. His mistress found herself in a similar situation, and they were now struggling together. The rumors had spread so far that neither of them could find a job in the tutoring industry. They moved far away, where the rumors hadn't reached, but still couldn't find decent jobs. They ended up living miserably, working temporary manual labor jobs. I saw some images of them circulating online that seemed to confirm this. I started working as a tutor, invited by my mentor. Of course, it was in a different location from where my husband and his mistress had worked. My mentor asked me to help set up a new school, and now I'm busy contributing to its growth. Despite the busyness, I feel fulfilled teaching again.